So guys, you want to learn how to paint awesome non-metallic metal, NMM swords, axes, cool fantasy stuff that's awesome. Today we're going through 3 different steps. Firstly, to paint a good one, and then an awesome one, and then the amazingest one. I'm going to show you all 3 steps. You can stop at any time, but stick around and watch the whole thing. It's easy, cool, awesome. If you've been enjoying any of my videos, subscribing and hitting the like button especially really helps out spreading these videos to new people. So go ahead and do that. Let's start painting. So we're looking to create a high contrast non-metallic metal weapon without spending ages on it. A couple of my favorite painters does this a lot. Sergio Calvo Rubio is one of them, and also Mark McLan. And you can see here what they've done. They've made the blade kind of cool, cold and sharp, kind of bright, and then contrasted it with the flat side of the blade of the weapon of the axe, depending on what they're painting. Kind of warm with brown, orange tones, and it's darker, so you really get the blade to pop compared to the flat side of the weapon. We can also see these pieces from Mark McLan, like this ogre dude that's having an elephant on his shoulder. He did exactly the same thing. It's incredibly effectful. He also did this with this barbarian. It's really awesome. It's not just a big contrast in brightness, but it's also in colors. You have the warm tones on the flat side and then the cold tones on the blades. And we're gonna do this. I'm gonna teach you how to do it quickly. And these techniques can be used on many different types of weapon. It doesn't have to be exactly this one. You can see here what I did on my Space Wolf and on the Amazon I painted last week. All of these different types of weapon have the same technique used but applied in different ways. For the flat side of the weapon we're using Rhinox Hide, Mournfang Brown and Trollslayer Orange, but you can use any brand, just similar paints. And for the bright side we don't have to use a specific color, we can mix this between different paint jobs we use. I often use Demonite Hide, but today we're using Underbelly Green from P3, but you can use Gray Green from Games Workshop or something from Vallejo, it really doesn't matter. I'm also adding some whites and black to the wet palette to get the highest contrast possible. So let's start with the flat side. I'm going to make a sort of a wet blend stipple mix here. I start with the darkest color, the Rhinox Hide, which is sort of a burnt umber dark brown. And then I start adding to the outer side of the edge. Not the one that's going to be closest to the blade, but the outer side, I'm adding the brighter Mournfang Brown. While the Rhinox Hide is still wet, I'm just stippling this on to create sort of a rust streak effect. After the Mournfang Brown, I do the same thing with the orange color and just stipple this in. And this might look really bad at first, but we're gonna fix that in a later step. Just let this dry for now and let's continue doing other things while it's drying. So let's start with blade. I'm using the color Underbelly Green from P3 here, and I use the wet palette to kind of thin my paint a little bit into the brush. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just check out my wet palette video linked in the corner right now. And then I just start sketching in where I want the brightest highlights to be. I'm creating 3 different highlights to act as the reflections on the blade. I've also added some dark sea blue to the palette, I had forgotten about that. And mixed in some of the dark sea blue to create a mid-tone between the underbelly green into the blacks of the blade, but that's just a minor thing. I'm just using that to create a smooth transition to the shades. And I'm not doing this transition with glazes, I do it with wet blending and or layers, just using different brightness and colors from the palette. And now we want to create a clear separation between the dark flat side and the blade. And we're doing that by creating a sharp, bright line on the edge of the blade and on the edge between the blade and the side of the weapon. I'm doing this with a 50-50 mix of white and underbelly green. And I'm covering this color with about 80-90% of the blade because this is just the base to kind of get a good sketch of where we want the highlights to be. And because the paint is kind of thin, we don't need to add something to create the second highlight, which is still just underbelly green but as you can see, when I add another layer, it becomes brighter and more contrasted. And I could do this about 3 times before I reach a maximum opacity of the underbelly green, and we need to start adding some white. We don't want to go super bright on the side of the blade here, we just want to add a little bit of white to kind of create that extra bit of punch. If we want to add a final highlight, like a super bright white, we just do it to the edge of the center of the brightest point. You can see me adding it here just to the side of the blade by the line that separates the blade and the side of the sword. And now we just want to add some more of the rust effects to the side of the sword. I'm starting by stippling some of the Mornfang brown in again. And when I've done that, I keep doing the same thing with the orange, just adding more and more layers, glazing some orange on top of it to blend everything together. This part can be kind of messy because rust in nature is really messy, so we just want to add and stipple and go nuts. Have fun. And to increase the contrast even more a bit between these two sides, we just add a thin line of black between the bright parts and the dark parts. This really separates them and creates a high contrast. And if you're feeling lazy, you could be done by now, but let's add 2 more steps and see if we can make it look even better with minimum effort. So what we're creating now is something called Earth-Sky Reflections. I'm imagining that this person is standing out in the daylight in some sort of desert where it's, a sandy dune maybe in front of him. So I'm adding some blues and some yellows to create a nice contrast between the sky and the earth. I just glaze a few layers of the yellow to the bottom side of it and some glazes of blue to the top side of the sword. And if I feel like I get too much paint, I don't feel too afraid of touching my model with my hand. I just remove that excess with my thumb and it looks great. And to top things off, we're edge highlighting the back side of the sword with some of the underbelly green as well, just to create this really nice edge effect. And oh my lord, look how beautiful it is. You could easily do this for a large portion of models, maybe for a large unit or something. It's fast enough for you to still keep the interest up, but this effect will be amazing, and people always look at weapons. Weapons and faces are incredibly important, so using this technique for your army is a really good way. But we can take it to the next step. Let's take a photo of this and put it into Photoshop, and I'll tell you exactly how. Taking a photo of your miniatures and adding them to Photoshop is a great tool to kind of increase your knowledge of how you can make something look better. I think here that the rust looks really good, but the blade is kind of flat to me. I feel like I should have gone a little bit further with the brightness of it and maybe adding a longer highlight here that covers a bigger surface. So I kind of played around with Photoshop, seeing how I could make it look better. Started by making a clearer line between the white and the darker part, like this. See, it's a small difference, but it makes a huge difference for the total. The next step is to add a longer part that's brighter. You might think that it looks a bit weird, but once we get to the end, you'll see that the difference is quite huge and it will make the miniature pop even more. See here, we now have a larger surface that is bright and it looks a lot sharper as well. So let's keep working. I added a white finish to the edge here, which would be kind of a top reflection where the light would be brightest. It makes a small difference again, but it's enough to be worth doing it. And then added a sharp line between the bright and the dark parts. And finally adding another one. So you can see the difference here from this to this. And this is not something you have to do. I think that the original one looks really good, but these are some great steps to add your miniatures into Photoshop afterwards and see how you can change things easily and what the next steps are to take your painting to the next level. Alright. So if you like this video, don't forget to like. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Oh my god. Don't forget to like. So guys, if you feel like you learned something, you had a bit of fun, there are tons of other videos on this channel. If you'd like to support this channel, you can either purchase any of the stuff that I use in the video, the 3D printer, the paint, the brushes, the airbrush, anything from my website squidmar.com. I have Amazon Associates links, so anything you purchase there, I get a commission from Amazon from without costing you anything extra. And also massive shout out to all of the Patreon supporters I have out there supporting me every month, like all of these top Patreon supporters. And my biggest one, Albin Ostrom, of course. Ooh, don't forget I have merch. I have merch like this shirts that these guys ordered. How awesome is that? And with that said, guys, have a great day. Bye.